Hello everybody, I'm here today with the wonderful Anthony Blake and we're going to be discussing, hi Tony, thanks for joining me again.
Hello Dev, glad to be with you again.
And we did a talk recently on your reminiscences with J.G.Bennett, and we wanted to do a bit more about that and about groups, because I had lots of people loved that show, but then I had a few people saying there's not enough discussion about what happened to groups, or what were they doing in the past, you know, in the 1960s and 1970s. So this is why I think people are quite drawn to this. And I don't think there's enough being told about what was going on in Gurgeous groups or Bennett groups or Ouspensky groups for people to follow on with nowadays, because there aren't many groups to go and join with. So, you know, we'd love to hear more about your times with Mr. Bennett. And you was there, how many years was you with him?
About 14 years, from about 1960 to, of course, his death in 1974. A few sort of interruptions of a year or so.
And because obviously different people came and went during that time, but there was probably always a certain core that stayed around. You don't have to name names, but I was just like, you know, is it kind of a group that people came and went, or what sort of?
Yes, he had, how to say, he had a number of people who'd known for a long time. And because he had this institute, which had his board of directors, and there were people who've been with him for decades, you know, making a formal role, but being with him in his various changes of fortune, experiments, encounters, and so on. And like even myself with the university, I had some people been in it for more than 20 years. And they're not, they don't have to belong to a group per se, but they're involved in the activity in some way and in the history, the events which have happened. And of course, Mr. Bennett, with his age when he died, which was in his late 70s, he'd had quite a history with people stretching back to the Second World War and the First World War and so on. Some people he'd known for, how long would you say? I don't know, some 40, 50 years. Just like I'm having people I've known for 40, 50 years. And it's exciting to be back with them. I mean, one of the things which I have in connection with Bennett's son, George, he came to visit me just last week, in fact. I think it was just last Friday. And he came to visit with his son and his son's son. So I had the three generations of Bennett there. But one of the things he got involved in before the COVID lockdown, he was going to meet some of the older people still alive who knew Mr. Bennett and talk to them. What was he like as a teacher and so on. And I'm hoping he's going to be able to renew that, because we need to have these, or I'd like to have these stories about what it was like and the changes of time. I'll just give a little illustration about the changes, which is just an accidental memory. But when I went to Coon Springs as a very fresh young lad, you know, 20, 21, 22, something like that. And it was all fresh and wonderful for me. And it was a time where change was going on at Coon Springs, because for 4 years it had been dominated by this movement called Subud. And so during that period, there were no groups as such. There were no movements, there were no morning exercises or anything of that nature. And it was, how to say it, just people involved in this particular exercise called the Latihan. And then at the end of that period was a time to actually physically connect with him. And we had this sense of people remembering how it was. And so because of there been that, I hope I'm putting it right, that sort of interval of time he'd been occupied in Coon Springs, with Coon Springs, it was a kind of space for people to have their different memories and reflections. I mean, he started up doing seminars and all the rest of it. And the fairly common comment was about how before this sort of period, Mr. Bennett had been ruthless. And they gave me this picture of they had a gravel pit, which they used, for some building projects, and people went to big it. And they said, there was this guy who was a violinist, and essentially he was sent down into the pit to dig away at this gravel. And somebody said they saw him, Mr. Bennett, come up with a shovel with some gravel and just throw it down on the pit where this guy was. This kind of thing, really? Was he so thought this and that? But I must add in here, Mr. Bennett was more ruthless with himself than with other people, but people were very, very scared of him. And there was another little anecdote, which was somebody said they saw, and something they witnessed with amazement, that there was a chap in the garden area. And this chap was a kind of businessman, professional, accomplished, a boss man, and all that kind of thing. And he was digging in the garden and so on. And he looked up and saw Mr. Bennett looking at him. So he immediately became very industrious. He worked very, very hard. Then Mr. Bennett drifted off and he looked down at what he was doing. He dug through the garden path onto the path and was digging up the path.
He wasn't paying attention to what he was doing.
No, he was just scared of Mr. Bennett. You see, all this kind of thing. But when I knew him, he was relatively mellow. And part of my example, this wonderful seminar, he started to call it a spiritual psychology, which was a wonderful thing. I was enjoying it so much, you see, and we're doing practical work up on the scaffolding by the house. And I was kind of singing away, cheerful, and they were saying, oh, you wouldn't have done that in the old days.
Well, we wouldn't have been singing.
Wouldn't have been singing, you weren't supposed to enjoy it. I was just enjoying my life and everything like that. So it's very strange to look back at it, how he had mellowed, but it was that old regime he had of effort. And you will know the story, which he puts into the diaries, Idiots in Paris, which his diaries, and Elizabeth. And he recounts Gurgeous going to Mr. Bennett and asking him not to work so hard.
Yes.
And that led to a story in his ideas, his understanding of Gurgeous' work, which is about an interpretation of a part of Beelzebub's tales, where he has these two extraordinary scientists, one the father, one the son, supposedly on the planet Saturn, and how one investigated this law of three and this tremendous apparatus, you see, and then afterwards became, his name became, how to say it, a symbol of something negative and bad, and his son had to put right the mistakes he made in his understandings. And it was all about this issue of, and I give you this artificial name, this special name. I love the sound of artificial jartklom. Now, you probably won't have a clue what artificial jartklom means. But
I did do a show with Josh about jartkloms, so people can look at that so they can know more.
Oh, great. I'm sure Josh has got a lot of insights. You
can, artificial jartklom.
Jartklom is some Armenian word in it with death in it. But it also means to, it's a kind of like shock waking up, in this sense, of artificial waking up. And it was, and Bennett's idea was at a certain time, Gurgeous was really stuck in that way of giving shocks, or even, I could call it, kind of violent edge to them, to upset, disturb people, as a way of waking it up. And this became part of the folklore, you see. You got the spiritual gurus and so on, and the ordinary people. And so it's quite okay for these special people to do disgraceful things with their pupils because it's for their own good. You know the sentiment. This is,
yes.
This is for your own good, son. Kind of thing. And so that was it. And it became rampant. And even known as the Coon Springs, you still had the remnants of people who would go around giving people shocks. And there's people taking it on themselves to wake the other people up.
Yes, I heard that people like to tread on other people's corns when maybe they're not qualified enough to do that.
Exactly right. But if the attitude behind it, that's a way at all to do it. So Bennett really caught hold of something at this time period, I'm sure, when he saw this and said that Gurdjieff changed his ways and no longer did that method of him as a superior person acting on another, but used conditions of life and so on, which was more Mr. Bennett's way. And I still remember talking with Mr. Bennett about this. I don't know if it came up in our previous conversation. I still can see him in his study he had in the town, in the place in the town he lived in. I know we got onto this conversation. He said that he was very distressed. I may have said this before, so forgive me. He was very distressed about how groups, we're talking about groups, were being run. And he said effectively people are subject to abuse, particularly sexual abuse, but abuse, just being attacked and diminished, demeaned, and all the rest of it. And he said it's all because the people who are so treated become used to it, and they consider it's only when they're being abused that they're in the work.
And also maybe it's a misunderstanding of the work, that because Gurdjieff says we've got to, deal with these kinds of things and do the inner considering when this is all happening. But maybe people are taking it in the wrong way, because we shouldn't be being abused by teachers. That was Mr. Bennett's position.
He said it was Mr. But also how Mr. Gurdjieff himself had realized this has so changed the way he worked. And this is his whole point, that what was in Beelzebub about this was actually a report on his own experience at the Prairie, how he treated people. And he did reform. Because I was got from him, and also from Elizabeth. I'll say something about what she told me about the Gurdjieff one, which was nice. The thing to don't expect how they learned. They didn't just go on doing the same thing, And for Mr. Bennett, it was absolutely radically important. I mean, I did a few times in my life with him and get subject to a rant, being a subject of his wrath, whatever it was, so it wasn't much. But usually he would always insist on this, that it's so constructed that life gives us enough shocks and they're, in a sense, organic to us. And having one person do it to another is a no-no. Because that serves to block an indication which can come to people from within. It blocks off their contact with their withinness. All of that doesn't lead people, this abuse doesn't lead people to opening up to something higher, entering them. It's the reverse. It closes them down. And you can see it's ordinary playing psychology. So that was important about that transition and the conditions in which people were encountering what we call it, the work or the ideas, the system, the fourth way. You see what I mean? That was my...
Oh, sorry.
No, please go on.
I was going to say, it's like they willingly want to become slaves because they want to be led, because they can't, it's an awful thing to say, but it's like they can't think for themselves. Like you go to these groups, I think, just to help you start out and then go on, like Gurdjieff used to send everyone away. You go on with what you've learned and put it into the world. Or how you put it in yourself into the world, using them exercises. Because I have heard of other groups over the years where the teacher seems to become a bit of a tyrant, or people are scared of them. And I'm like, I wouldn't want a teacher that I was scared of.
Yeah, right. It was possibly, particularly Gurdjieff, who he's sometimes described in the literature as he became a kind of exemplar of this idea of the guru, the teacher, teacher. He became, what do you call it, a paradigm of that sort of thing. But this, of course, brought with it these very simplistic pictures of what it was to be like, because always you get the worst, most stupid interpretation of anything is what dominates. The subtleties are always forgotten. And there is a kind of place for certain kinds of intervention. And I'll mention one of them because it just come into my mind. And it was the stop exercise, which you've probably come across in some of your podcasts and so on with Josh and so on. And I mentioned because I did have the opportunity to sort of administer this, if I could say, the stop exercise during my my experience with Bennett and afterwards even. But it was just based on this empirical psychological fact. Of course, people are asleep and so on. They can't make this break with their mechanicality entirely by themselves. There needs some outside assistance. And the stop exercise was very appropriate in its way because it wasn't particularly bound to just this word, you know, stop. And it had in it this whole understanding about the real nature of consciousness and so on, and the nature of challenge, which became for Mr. Bennett a very, very important principle about how do we generate consciousness by challenge, but it's challenge, not brutality, you see, this kind of thing. And I'll say a little bit more about it, because not too much, because it's very experiential. And that's, I just find, you think the person, you know, you got to have a setup. There is some kind of history of people in the community, and so some people are allowed to do the stop exercise, not anybody around them to do it, just because they do. Because what it has is the way in which it's done. And I still remember this coming about it, where you think, well, you're in a group of people, you're digging in the garden, you know, you've got this role, you've got to give the stop exercise. And what do? We look around, and perhaps you're careful, you look at somebody, they're not in a dangerous situation, which if they stop would harm them, and so all that kind of way. But there's something totally beyond this very excellent reasoning, you know, and use of intelligence to be sensible in what you do. And those times myself, it was like, when it really genuine command and stop comes out, it sort of hits the person giving the stop. It's not a, you see, because it doesn't have that nature. We're talking about this conversation, one person doing something to another. You know, because it's the person given the stop, you might think he's the control, he's deciding, but in a way he's not. It has to be inwardly tuned in, so it comes out, stop. And if it comes from him of working out, oh, I see so-and-so, so it's just picture a hot cup of tea, and so it will hurt them holding it, so I'll do it for a laugh. No, and so on. So there is.
So be aware of when is a good time to do that, because I heard there was a story of.
But not even that. It's not even being aware of a good time to do it.
Oh.
It's because it's got to sort of come upon your role. It's weird. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's my decision. Is because your role is to be really spontaneous. You see, it comes from creative energy, from free attention. You see, it's not any kind of working out. However good that is and righteous that is, it's not the point. It's got to go and be that moment. There's some moments in the Fourth Way which are close in character to Zen. I think this action in a moment. So there's that.
Do you think when the Subodh came along, did that obviously the Gurgeous exercises and the work like that, did that actually stop then being used in the Bennett work completely?
Yes.
Or was that
Yes, absolutely. And this is, I counted myself, I count myself lucky to be in that period when I encountered Bennett, and he was not doing any of that. And then I saw him begin to reintroduce it. So I had the evolving experiences. There's still kind of unknown story with Mr. Bennett about that. Part of it is he had this capacity, which was a tremendous virtue and a tremendous vice, and which it is both. You know, you come across something and you see a potential and he put himself into it totally. He wouldn't, how to say, skimp on it, so that you could do it half-heartedly. And if he did it, he went and boom. And I've told you before in a previous talk, his nickname was the Elephant. And so when he started moving, he had a hell of a lot of momentum. You didn't want to get in his way. He came charging off, you see him go, oh, he's in one of his moods, you know, my God, something's got hold of him, he's going to do this, going to do this. And so what the guy did, you know, he went around the world, he wrote a book about it. He had people pouring into Coon Springs. This is one of the many occasions which he upset the, trying to think of adjectives which are not too rude. I'll just use vague term, and the stuffed shirts, you know, who says about, you know, imagine they knew what the Gurdjieff work was and they didn't like any of this thing which seems to break the rules, break the pattern. But going back to it, Jebby, and you raised it, it's you know, I've got to admit, a lot of people in the Gurdjieff work saying really hated Gurdjieff, despised him and all, because he would entertain these influences which didn't seem to conform to the work as they knew it.
Surely that's to help you challenge or to even look at other ways of looking at things.
Of course, that's right. But they kept on saying, he's a very naughty boy, you know, he's a very naughty boy.
Because I get that from people. People say to me, are you into Steiner or Gurdjieff? And or whatever. God. And it's like, well, I like to look at everything, you know, and I don't see what the problem is with that.
No. If you'd like Mr. Bennett so much, you'd like it, because, you know, originally he was very interested in Steiner. And he went to Turkey, and of course, changed because 1925 Steiner died. But in Turkey, he met this wonderful man, Prince Sahibind, who was a kind of follower and friend of Steiner. And he was very interested in that. But then he had the personal experience of Gurdjieff, so that put him out of it. But yes, it's the purists can be extremely rigid. And I myself tend to think of them. There's a taint in the fourth way of a kind of, what do you call it? Reactionism, what the word is. Also, right-wingness is a kind of needs appeal to authority and systems and structure and so on. But that's endemic in human life and society and politics, the left wing and right wing, you know. And how Gurdjieff deals with this very deftly. And it's one of the key but very sensitive points, like the end of his Beelzebub's Tales, he talks about maybe there has to be reestablished some system of masters and slaves. He said, even though this is completely obnoxious in the face of objective morality, and he struggles with this, and his character is, you know, the person who is actually a rebel, Beelzebub, who gets thrown out of heaven, so to speak, and demoted to wandering the solar system because if he dared to question the authorities. So there's all that background in Gurdjieff. Yes, against this, and it was so remarkable because it came, I believe, at a time when he himself was going through a crisis because, and Bennett was very extraordinary because he kept on learning. He kept on re-understanding things and putting it into new light. You know, it wasn't just carrying on.
Nothing was fixed.
Nothing was fixed for him. And it's not because the accidental things you see about how it was he had that meeting with Gurdjieff about, I don't know, a few weeks or something in Turkey. Then he had this prairie for about 3 to 6 months. I've forgotten how long it was. And then he got out of touch with him and he was blocked from contact with him because of Ouspensky, who forbade everybody to contact Gurdjieff. And it was just, he assumed he was gone, dead. And it was decades. And then in 1947, 48, began to meet him again just for a year or two. And then Gurdjieff died. You see, one aspect of it gave him a lot of time to explore his world. You know, when you mentioned Gurdjieff sending people away deliberately, and you think this is in fact an incredibly intelligent action, because if they stay with him, it can't get free of him.
Becomes a pattern.
Yeah.
And you want to be, if you stay with him, you expect him to show you the way and be your leader. And he's trying to teach you, no, go and be a leader yourself, not necessarily of groups, but of yourself.
Yes. Now, how long is the kind of question is this, right? In to Hartman, you had this intimate connection with him, this great relationship. It's only together, I don't know, number of 3, 4, 5, most 5 years, probably less. And they went through with him that experience in the Esentuki and coming down at the time, the Russian Revolution, coming across to Turkey and then into Europe and France. And then it's about 2 or 3 years working with him at the Prairie, doing all this wonderful music. And then piss off, you know, go away. And obviously it was not easy for de Hartman to do that. He had this career, and that's what's being followed up by Ilan Sikroft and this wonderful project of celebrating de Hartman's music. And you just really heard he's going to go to the Ukraine in September.
Show off the box.
That's of his CD. But the best in Ukraine actually, because this is where de Hartman was born. They're taking him up and they're performing some of the symphonies, because Ilan hadn't been able to get more than the chamber orchestra. So there's all that, and this remarkable man, you see. And so he gave him that chance to go and do his own thing. And it relates to something I'm coming around a little circle here too. If you want to know about Bennett's, I think the very basic attitude to the work was, it's kind of like, he kind of like set himself down to think, well, come on, what's the essence of all this, what this practice happening? What are the basic foundations, how does it work? And he wrote this book, I'm so glad eventually it was possible to be done. His friend Ken Pledge edited it and put it together. I think I really recommend a book called Transformation, because what he does is try and set it out in a way which doesn't say, this is the Gurgeous work. He say, look, understand transformation, what are the essential components of doing this? And there's much to say about that book. I think it's incredibly valuable, and it contains a lot of things which people don't do because they get attracted to the externals. And it might seem strange to say things like the movements, inner exercises are externals, because they're not based on understanding what they're for, how they work, the purpose, and so on. People just do them out of routine. So there he did that. But he mentioned grooves. And I was very struck by this because it affected me at one time particularly strongly. It's a lot to say about groups, and I have my own strong opinions about groups, which a lot of people disagree with. But one thing, you get into a group, and it does lift you up for a time because you're in the company of like minds. Because often most people feel they're in a world that doesn't make sense to them. They can't really talk to things about other people, about what's inside them, what they're feeling. And so they find people where they say we are looking within together and looking at other ideas, and it's very, very supportive, and you're lifted up from the ordinary world, so to speak. But then you've got these relative versions. How long?
Well, how long till I transform?
How
long should I be in a group for? Because I think that's a very important point.
No,
people are about transforming, aren't they? But then people also do ask, how long is this going to take? It's down to the individual.
It won't really be how long will I go on transforming, because the question whether it do start transforming as part of being in the group. In other words, is it really working? And because you don't know what the rules are. Or anything like this, you get vague ideas and impressions and probably silly notions about treating higher beings like some kind of celebrities. But it's no,
on that pedestal.
Excuse me. And Bennett very clearly said, it shouldn't be in the group for more than, he said, 2 or 3 years. And he said, or at least, he says, then you should take stock and say, because that was one of the demands in the work I felt, which is like minimally applied, which is to use your intelligence. This is one of the rare things. And I tell you, another aside, when Mr. Bennett was a pupilry of Ouspensky, and of course you had that system. In that system, Ouspensky was propagating of obeying the teacher and all of that. And Bennett tells the story how Ouspensky would tell him to come to a meeting and so on. And it would be like the one chance he had to be with his wife, but he had to abandon that because Ouspensky said, go to be at this meeting. So he talked to Ouspensky about this. He said, why didn't you tell me? I would have been all right, So Bennett was very subtle about this. It was a very difficult area. He said, he had obedience, but it wasn't real obedience. it was external obedience to the letter and so on. And this happens. So you have to be careful what's really going on. And it even can be extended, you know, say 2 or 3 years, and you must, it's like not, you could make it too weak if you just like assess what's going on, you know, and sit back and assess, that's good, but it might even be, you really have to make some change or radical step or something, because otherwise it will stagnate and this kind of thing. So in this book, Transformation, he was onto such things as that, because he didn't say it was a Gurgeous group, could be any kind of group, Steiner group, if you like that, any kind of group has this property. He had a sense, a common sense about the way in which we work. You know, because people said, "Oh, you want to go sing this nice group? If I do it for 10 years, this will produce twice as much benefit of doing it for 5 years." In fact, the complete opposite can be true. By perpetuating oneself in this group, you can be actually undoing oneself and blocking oneself more than anything else. You just don't know. And then you come to that great philosophical thing of Mr. Bennett, which is everybody wonders about, or some people like, some people don't like. That's hazard. He said, the reality and values come through hazard, you know, like art comes through hazard, science comes through hazard, love comes through hazard. You know, it's all a kind of well-paved path, whatever it is.
Yes, if I follow this step, that will lead to that step.
Yeah, no, you said.
It's kind of like what happened in the New Age. A lot of New Agers are trying to help people to plan their future, you know, so that they know where they're going to be in 5 years' time. And I was quite surprised at this when I was looking into all this in the last, let's say, 20 years, if that's how they do it. Because I always just thought, but surely life's too unpredictable. But people want that. They want to follow a plan, a program, that I'm going to be in this stage in 5 years and over here in 10 years. And then I wonder if that's why so many people are disappointed in this kind of work. It shouldn't be planned. Sorry.
No, why you misunderstand? This is exactly what matters. This kind of common sense. I was thinking of Russia with its 5-year plans. What an atrocity it produced. Madness. And it's well known, but it's still being done all over the world, this kind of stupidity. I was talking to an old friend of mine who works on various governmental agencies and companies and so on, and enterprises, and also in Eastern Europe as well as in Asia. And he said it's just everywhere they've got these systems in place, and they're just nonsense, absolute nonsense, because they don't deal with humanity, don't deal with what happens between people at all. And they impose these regimes and these systems, these checklists and these requirements and these forms, and it's just so nothing can happen. Like he said, talking about in the World Organization devoted to cutting out corruption. He says, I know, they set in place these systems and so on, and actually he knows, he understands they will increase corruption, but they go on do it because it looks good on paper. Anyway, we're getting away from it. Are we getting away from it? Because, you know, Debbie, this is the thing about the work can be treated like, oh, the work, you know, so we're spiritual. Ooh. It's got nothing to do with running a factory, you know, bringing up a family or whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's not real life anymore. And there was a sense in which I think I was so struck. I still remember to this day this working with Mr. Bennett. There was a lady who worked with him for quite some time, and everybody adored her. And her special role, you will laugh, was to make sure after a painting action we'd had, or, you know, practical work, that the paintbrushes were cleaned. That was what you see.
We need clean paintbrushes.
yeah, but you think that was a great thing with when you had these people with this completely down to earth practical element, and they weren't hoity-toity about, oh, I will have to go away and meditate now. You know, clean the bloody brushes. And when I was, you know, my great first teachers at Coon Springs, I might have mentioned in the last talk, was Lily Hostenius, we called the Dragon. And I was the kitchen boy in the back, and we had, you know, up to 100 people sometimes there. And I had to clean all these great pots, you know, this size. And that time was there, I looked really, not because it was so concrete, so direct. This is the job to be done. You do it, you know, I don't care if you're supposed to be aware of yourself. Get the bloody pot clean.
Yes, be aware of yourself cleaning the pot.
As long as you actually clean the pot, you know, so full of your own awareness that you're just enjoying yourself too much. But there it is. So that's down to earthness about it. And coming back to groups, there's a question, there's a danger in it, of course, because you join this group and you know, right, who knows how they work? Who knows how they're supposed to work? There's an implicit belief. Right? People are around and they, you know, you find them and they say, oh, that person runs a group. And so to join it, you kind of like have to join a certain belief.
The person who's running the group's belief.
That's right. Somehow or other, he's got to face, he or she must really have something, must know what they're doing. And it's, how to say it, it's not simply that it's not the case to know what they're doing. The more awful thing, they've never considered to question what they're doing at all. And so it's another conversation perhaps to get into this phenomenology of the groups and it's how it's done. Because most of your strong proportion of people have this thing, like we say, he's in charge of a group. And it's like the whole assumption is, oh, they're really is in charge because they're able to be in charge and they know what they're doing. And people in this group know what the group is and how it works. But none of that is true. It is buying into something and it carries with it all the features which you get from other life, because, you know, from politics, from business, from the family, all these things impressing us about how things work. You know, in a lot of these fields, there's so much which is unspoken, unquestioned, and that carries over into the spiritual world. So the people running these groups do not know what they're doing, but they're always concerned giving the impression that they do know what they're doing.
Surely that's ego.
But it's perhaps it's simply to say ego, because it's like they, as we said earlier on, you know, certainly we like to be assured of, you know, somebody knows what's going on and we're part of that. And we know what we're doing, and we know future is, even though we don't have a 5-year plan or something, how enlightened we'll be in 10 years' time, anything like that. But it's just that kind of assurance we have, which means you start believing in something you really don't understand or don't know, and you can't test. There was that strand in Gurgeous, which was a very frail strand, in fact, and don't accept anything you don't understand. It's really a slightly weak proposition.
But shouldn't we be looking at what we don't understand and perhaps trying to, I don't know, decipher it or find out why we don't understand it, which might lead to some kind of understanding?
Well, that's a virtuous thought, and you're going to look at, I mean, I get to it in a moment with Mr. Bennett. How do we, about how we do this? But it's this lady, you're involved in doing things where you've got this, it's a social thing, you see, you're in your peers, and that's an enormous effect on us. You know, being in a group of other people, and just to jump a few stages in this, you see, it's very difficult usually for anyone, and I don't know if you understand this phrase, to put the head above the parapet. You've come across that phrase? Mm-hmm. You know, to stand out. And we have that famous story just hinting at us, because a lot of these old simple stories and legends are powerful if we take them seriously. And that's, of course, the emperor's new clothes. You know that story. And little boys, you ain't got no clothes. And shut up, so, you know. But all that thing, do you remember the description of it is so, I think anybody in the so-called work should study that story. Really, they say that they swindle people. They, oh, this class is so fine. Only the very perceptive can see it. So people say, oh, I'm perceptive. I must pretend to see it even if I don't. And that's what's happened. Everyone's going around pretending to see something which isn't there. And that's the whole, you know, look at any sphere, look at politics and all the rest of it. It's just, oh, it's just full of that. And so, I mean, the work sort of has these many faces, but there's two particular faces of it which interest me. There's a face which is looking about, you can take this phrase, you're waking up, you see, you can treat it as a kind of psychological state, something, well, we don't know about psychological state, but I call it a state, you know, a higher state. You begin to, and you can see the whole world in a different sense and that, and feel oneself in a different way and that sort of thing. There's another kind of waking up, which even comes out in this awful kind of thing like woke. You know, it's interesting they use that term, woke. You see?
Yes, because I've had a lot of people mistaking what I've been doing shows on about waking up in what we're talking about, thinking I'm talking about being woke. Ooh.
Yes, right.
But that's another story. But it's a shame that that word's being used, because I feel like it's being misused to try and perhaps, you know, dilly-dally with the waking up people and to confuse people in what the difference is between the two, because there's a big difference.
The big difference is a tricky one, because I'm thinking, even something like Marxism, you see, Marxism, you know, whether one likes them or not, you do this essential seeing the way in which things work from a certain perspective, an insight into it, you know, like to do with capital and labor and distribution and that kind of thing. And it takes something, you begin to see, oh, that's, you know, things are happening in that way, and it's because of certain kinds of control being present, which are not normally noticed. And you begin to see these connections, which are not normally noticed, which is a kind of waking up, which is political. And you might argue it. And I'm bringing it into this stage because I'm more and more inclined to look at the work as not something necessary. It can't be separate from the confusions, the anxieties, the dilemmas of our life together, you know, because and often the so-called spiritual thing is taken as a refuge from all of this messy, bewildering and painful world, you know, because what do you get? Oh, there's somebody that really knows what they're doing, who really is aware, who really has compassion and all of that, which is in contrast to what we find with contrast to your neighbor, and you don't know what anything means and all that sort of thing. You see what I'm getting at? It's not simplistic anymore. And you talk to New Age, and it is escapism from the rigors of it. And I throw in here my favorite prejudices and beliefs, you know, to do with groups. And I mean this very seriously. I say that often I feel the groups are a way of people becoming less conscious, because you don't stand on your own feet, you just merge, you see, and peer pressure, it predominates. As I say about the above the parapet metaphor, you know, taking it up. And I've seen this a bit happen. And if somebody does in a group, they are ostracized, turned into pariahs, expelled from the group. They become they. You know. Even think of Mr. Oswensi, an incredible man, a beautiful, amazing man. He do this, and he forbid people, don't talk to those people. You know, I forbade people, do not talk to Gurgeous, he is bad. And then afterwards, when Bennett was, Spencer had gone to America, came back and seen Mr. Bennett just doing what he would like to do, which is, you know, developing this understanding of system, sharing with people. And then they said, you were wrong, you have stolen all my material, you didn't ask me permission. Do not talk to Mr. Bennett.
But that, because I find that, well, I suppose, not just confusing, but it's just like, why did it become like that? you know, obviously we don't meet him face to face to be able to discuss it, to ask him, you know, and I know it's something a lot of people look into and ask me a lot. Why did Ouspensky split? Why did Ouspensky not want anyone to talk to Gurdjieff? But none of us are able to actually ask him personally to get the truth of it.
No, no. But you could see that kind of behavior in other fields of life, you know. You can say, well, even I reduce it to statistically, there's bound to be quite a number of people acting like that in whatever the system is. And you shouldn't expect people. I mean, I've got this naivety. They say, oh, because they come across these wonderful ideas that they therefore become wise, compassionate, tolerant, and all this. No, the baggage comes with them.
With it, yes. And you know, I have to speak to a lot of people about this kind of thing when they go, oh, you know, Buddha did it and things. And like, well, Buddha took himself out of life. We're doing this work so we can live in this life, but not get caught up in the lunatic asylum. You know, it's very difficult, you know, either go and be in a monastery or a retreat for a year and learn to be compassionate. And as you say, you know, become one, but then go home to your family and spend a few weeks with them and see how long it lasts.
I know, you know, you're married, or you were married, and I know marriage is the best touchstone anybody can have is with a spouse, you know, because you just revealed what a wretch you are every day. You know, just it's no getting away from it. Another thing, an example, my dear friend Simon Wakeman, who was one of the major pupils of Mr. Bennett, and he was very attracted to a man whose name I've forgotten now. I think he was Turkish. He was an extraordinary Sufi and saint and so on, but he spent, you know, at a very young age following through a very orthodox path, Sufi path of training, and he was also a musician, developed his musical abilities. And then at one point he left it and began took up the profession in banking. And he was said afterwards, he said, he learned more in the banking than he ever did in all this Sufi training.
Having to become aware of how to deal with these bankers.
Yeah, because it's there's something external to law, you know, like you've got to make money or whatever it is. There's something like that. And it's like an engineer. They say, God, the bridge has got to stand up. You're in the physical real world, and the other world can be so enclosed and empty. But we're getting away from Mr. Bennett and groups. There's very, you see, it's this whole discussion of understanding. You know, what is a group? You know, what kind of group and how does it work?
Can I just give you an example of something that happened to me a few years ago? I tried to start a reading group of Beelzebub's Tales, and you know, a few of us would meet up. There wasn't many, and people came and went. But people kept saying I was the leader, and I kept saying, no, I'm trying to do this as a group, that no one's a leader and we're all here to help each other. And okay, there were people that are only just starting to read it. So, you know, we try and help them because they've never read it. But people were beginning to put me on a pedestal, and I found it so uncomfortable. And I don't feel qualified enough to be a teacher. And I didn't want to be. I just wanted a reading group where we discuss reading. Of course, yes.
Yes.
Like we were doing ourselves when we did a few Zoom meetings during the lockdowns, didn't we, where we would talk about certain chapters and read the chapters together, you know, but we all did it because we wanted to learn more and help each other. But people, you know, I do understand people want someone to look up to, but it is difficult when you just want to do a reading group.
This is quite true, and I'm reminded of the story I told you about Charles Tart. I don't remember his name. He's a mainstream psychology professor, but also admirer of Gurgeous ideas and methods. And I'll repeat the story anyway, is that he, as his experiment, thought he'd do a very basic course on self-observation amongst the students he had as a orthodox teacher, external, you know, psychology professor. And he found, you know, got an interest in a number of people coming along. And he talked about one day when somebody asked him a question, and he said, quite honestly, I don't know the answer. Fair enough. And then he noticed something. He noticed in the moment the students looking about themselves and looking at him in awe. And he knew, because He was a trained psychologist, not like usual group leaders who are not trained psychologists at all, just nignogs and full of ego. He thought something's up here. They are projecting onto me. This is projection. So what did he do? He stopped, cut the whole group, never did it anymore. What would happen in an ordinary group is that it would perpetuate itself even more strongly. We're getting all this interest. I'm being treated as somebody special. Boom, boom, boom. So you see, because it takes this trained mind. You got to get this training and this knowledge to guard against it, because the rule is people will fall for it, fall for this identification with being a leader, and the people, and because the people themselves project it onto you. Why are they doing this? Because they're not dealing with themselves. You see, this is how it is and how it runs on. And most of the people in that position take advantage of it, and so they get more and more stupid. You don't need this. No. This was, I'm going to use the word us, I mean, the kind of, because I was with some youngish people, mostly, you know, university students and so on in the sciences. But he was, we had this thing with the groups in which it was hierarchical, because Bennett would appoint who led them, you know, and what would lead them mean was they'd be given themes to explore, and then people would come up with their observations, and then the person would respond to their observations. And that's crudely put for a system which dominates, and it has, or can have, strangely, quite strong drawbacks. And there's a lot about this from my other friend, Russell Schreiber, and I do recommend reading his book on Gurgeous transformational psychology. That he was in nylon groups, and he said they had this tyranny of language, anyway, because they would not allow people to report give their observations unless it was in the right language, and it would be commented on in the right language. So it always excluded what was genuine for the people. You know, it was.
What's the right language?
Was that language is what they approve of, what they take to be the right way, the truth, and so on, because they are the carriers of the authoritarian system. They represent. This is what it is. You don't realize that all they're doing is forcing people into that mold, and you do get enough conformity, so it goes on transmitting itself, you see. But that's why you find in these groups being a vague term at this point, you know, that people never or hardly ever come up with things which are really, really bothering them in the heart. You know, I've seen a few examples of this intimately, which struck me so powerfully. And you see somebody maybe, you know, something happening in his family, which is like destroying him, but it's never raised when they come to this group, which is supposed to be. Why? Because it's looking at these, let's call it, these inner things, these potential things. You don't talk about rubbish. I was stimulated in that attitude years ago. I joined an extraordinary international dialogue group, and which was met often in Belgium, sometimes in this country. People all over the world, based on what was called then called Birmingham Dialogue. And I still remember one meeting was set up. There was this French woman, gorgeous French woman, and sitting around usual trying to get this dialogue going. Then she started talking about being beaten up by a boyfriend. And you're frowning. Why are you frowning?
Oh, no, it's like, oh. But anyway, carry on, yes. I was like, oh, I don't like hearing people being beaten up by...
No, you don't like
this.
Yeah. You know, but she's a very sophisticated French woman, because she said she was calling her boyfriend out on being a sort of stuck-up arsehole, you know, from because the French males are so arrogant twits. But I just said, my initial reaction was she talking about this trouble at home and boyfriend? We're supposed to be having a dialogue. And I thought, what am I meaning? What is this dialogue supposed to be about? It's about our lives, our reality. And then, oh, there are special things. So talking about our inner work, we talk about only this inner work. We don't talk about picking our nose and washing up or whatever it is. This is not these low things, This is everybody, like Gurgeous saying that wonderful thing is about when he's asked to give a blessing to somebody going on a journey. May angel and devil go with you, but trust the devil, because angel here always want to become archangel. If you reflect on get it, he was a genius with words, that sort of thing. That is right, you trust the devil, because you just, like anybody else, I'm a nasty bugger. I mean, just full of conceit and idiocy and lying and all that. This is just the bottom line, You get spiritual ideas, you start pretending. And pretending, and your pretense goes on and on. It's awful. So what happens in the groups can only go so far. Because if you penetrate beyond a certain realm, then certain things break down. For example, I will know a priori, in essence, if you had a little group and it started going deeper into what was going on with the people, the whole structure of a person in charge of the group and the people under the group would break down. You can't maintain that. And this is the assumptions made in these groups is that you can. There's somebody superior, who's not affected by this emotion, who's clear of it, who's a higher level, who can see what you're doing and all these things. And okay, it's maybe, well, you can, well, I feel anyway, one can imagine that there were some things to happen, but if it doesn't go on too long, that's the thing about stopping. And I'd like to go into a whole little spiel about stopping.
Go on then.
Okay. But you see, it's just human. You come across great things, whatever it is. I don't know, could be music, but in the work, as I often say, something like the movements. And you really get into it. You see, this is great. And I had a certain sort of experience about this. I don't know if it helped to mention it, about Subud, as I was in Subud and things are happening to me, and I wrote to Mr. Bennett about this, saying how this it was sort of coming upon me, and I would say it was slightly out of control, whatever it was. And Mr. Bennett said, you should stop this for a while. But I could hardly accept his advice. Because I thought, you understand, I wouldn't, there's a certain exercise you do. And I said, no, you should, his advice was, there he was, the wise man telling me, just stop it for a while. I didn't obey him. You see, this is a good thing. And I want to have it. This is, you can't tell me to stop this, taking it away from me, But this is the practicalities which screw people up endlessly in the law, because you imagine you've got a good thing, let's have more of it. No, no.
But do you think maybe some people think, because Gurgeous says you keep on going in whatever you're doing to break that, when you get tired, continue to get a new set of energy built up. Maybe you're thinking, right, I have to keep on doing it because I will get that, that extra piece, when really sometimes we need to step back, ponder on everything we've been doing, or just maybe not even ponder, just step back and do something else for a while and let it all digest inside you, in your subconscious or whatever, or in your inner self.
Yeah.
And then when you go back to, because he wasn't telling you to stop it forever, was he? He was telling
no.
take a break.
It's all the practicality. So putting a time, it's very practical. You see, you do it for a time, then assess, then you do something else for a time. And so it's for a time, but everyone treats it in these ridiculous absolutes, stop this forever and do it forever. And it's nonsense. I also wrote it in a little book I wrote on intelligence once, and that's what I say. Oh, there's some phrase that came up as an action is only intelligent if it can be stopped. Most so-called action in life, people can't stop.
Okay, yes.
You reflect on it.
Too far.
No, reflect on it. It's naivety. This is plus and minus, good and evil. You know, this is good, so do more of it. No, this is good, therefore it's bad. You see, in other words, you've got to watch it. Mm-hmm. That's where you become human. That's where you face hazard. That's all. It's not I have the formula, or like having a nice, imagine having special food or something. I just eat this food. Maybe
the philosopher's stone. You know how to create the philosopher's stone.
Right, yeah. These are difficult points, though, Debbie. You see, people ask about this group and use groups and so on. You see, let's look at the, some of the rationales of it. And it was very good rationale. The first one I think of, which is people somehow will come across these ideas, which are about the way in which the universe works and we work. Then how do we assimilate this? You see, and get into it, and what's the connection between theory and practice? And
but should there be a template for every group? Follow.
This method came up of, which is essential, and it's quite straightforward, but also strangely neglected. The point of having group actually is related in essence, in principle, to the principles of true, what I call dialogue, is because you need a certain requisite variety. And requisite variety of having different kinds of people together, with different backgrounds, prejudices, and all the rest of it, so that by exchanging, they can establish things which are to some degree free of these particular biases and colors which we bring to things, and also brings with it many deeper issues which have these grand names like compassion and this kind of thing that you can, but have that ultimate sort of thing, which for Bennett was an ultimate thing to say you're no different from anybody else. That people say, yeah, I know that, but to really get it, it's got to knock you sideways, absolutely knock you sideways. But that's why you need the people to get together, exchange it. So then you produce a format. How can you get this exchange? And going back to us young lads with these groups, we were very interested in what was at that time things called sensitivity groups or T groups or something, and where you had this explosion around the in the 60s of this, people begin to wake up to the having processing in groups, which isn't just like talking across each other, talking about things, but actually engaging in a more concrete way, so that it became a very matter of feelings, an emotional exposure and so on, and other stories about that. And our hero came from the literature of this man, I still think extraordinary, Wilfred Bion. And he wrote this thing, Experiences in Groups, which we were captivated by because it was something, and it had a great bearing on, well for me, as this conversation is about. This man he was at Northfields. It was a hospital where they had psychiatrists and psychologists working with soldiers who were shocked through experiences in the war, and they ostensibly had the job of curing them and sending them back to the war and so on. But they had some of the rather geniuses I will be on. He did this extraordinary thing of having meetings And it wasn't just within him and the patients, so to speak, but also the staff. We put the staff together with the patients and this kind of egalitarian thing. And he would just put it together and see what happened. He talked about being a leader. He actually sustained not being a leader, which is, if you try to, it's you know it, it's excruciatingly difficult. And he kept on throwing it back at them. You know, what's going on? What do you want to do? And all this kind of thing. And and he brought out these principles, which I loved, because he talked about a work group, not like the Gurgeous work group. The work group, he meant it scientifically. The group has a job to do. They know what the job is, and they know if they're doing it or not doing it. That's a work group for him. He said, in contrast with this, most groups, of course, most of them, really are not practicing any truly empirical, logical program at all. And they believe themselves to be eternal. There is no finitude in it. There is no death in it, you see. And it struck me like a bomb. This is all because you go to, you know, spiritual groups of various kinds, Steiner or whatever they are, and you go in there, they probably not one of them actually addresses its own termination.
Now, most of them are just trying to strive to continue forever.
Exactly.
Things die out. You know, that's why we've had ages of different ages in our human history. Ages come and ages go. You know, where are the Romans today? You know, that kind of thing. Or where's the Greek way of thinking of the ancient philosophers? You know, cycles go round, don't they?
Well, that's cycles, turning cycles into an agency. Why? There's a certain element to which it's rather with creative thinking, which you reminded me of here. You see, the basic kind of mechanism or description of it says is like people get exhausted trying to do stupid things. That is, to solve the problem, come up with something. They do things which don't work. They keep on doing these things, repeating useless things. This is what most people do. So trying to be creative until they get so exhausted, they give up. And when they give up, something new can come in. There's that sort of thing, but it's so unintelligent, you see. Because this, going back to the aim to stop things, see, you know, to stop things. And it's incredible when it comes to the stop exercise. Why is it miraculous? In principle, it is an incredible miracle. It has a personal interest for me because in the early days, Mr. Bennett, after Subud, he would start the groups again, but he'd also invite people to come and see a group, whether they like it, and he would also talk to them about. He was a rare person. He wanted people to understand, what do you think about this? You know, what is this work we talk about? And what does it mean to you? And he'd talk with us, you know. Hardly anybody else does that because they sit up there, we know, you don't know, listen to us. We are like Mr. Natural. We are the needs bees. Just follow me, boy. This kind of thing. No. So
but also the problem with that is because people want to listen, don't they? They don't want to have to discuss. Some people find it very different, like with that reading group I was telling you about.
Yeah, there you are.
Those few weeks, people didn't really want to talk. Gradually, they came out of themselves and did. So, okay, I understand that takes time, you know, and people have to build up their confidence to want to speak. Yeah. But there are too many people that do just want to listen and never think and just be told what to think.
Good. I'll chuck them out the group. I mean, but no, that's unfair. But it's you see, you put your finger on, this is the operating question, practical, how to do this, you know. And this is like, I say, I got myself interested in such things as the dialogue group from Patrick Damari and also social dreaming from Gordon Norris. Because you know, you see, and I really like the formalisms with dialogue, because you get the tradition, Damari and Lawrence, you know, had this, you know, because you have this kind of training and discipline, or defining it for the group, and you say what is the primary function of this group? And you say the primary, well, you could do it in two ways. But one way is to say is to learn how to talk together. then you can add things. I used to add things and say, presumably you don't believe you need to learn how to do that because you think you can do it already. And so blah, blah, blah. But it would give you an idea. There is it. It's doing something. And I thought this is absolutely in accord with the work, because the whole work is predicated on the fact of trying to get people to develop something which they believe they already have. Like consciousness, as Gurgeous says. People don't want to develop consciousness because they got it already. So they're just faking it all the time. This is what they do. They don't want to become all conscious because they think they got it already.
So they don't really understand what consciousness is.
No. Because if you assume you have it, you don't no incentive to go and get it or do anything about it or question what you got, as you say. You see. So there we are. So there's that. So how to.
Well, I was going to throw in a stop exercise and bring a stop to this, because we've been talking for an hour and nearly 15 minutes.
Really? I thought it was just 10 minutes.
I know, it goes really quickly. I did want to say one thing about the group he was talking about that's not a Gurdjieff group, where he was saying he didn't want, shouldn't be for eternity. Do you think he didn't want to say that because that work group was about working in the now, and the now isn't eternal? We should be working.
No, it's a combination of things.
Right.
Yeah, Wilfred Byron was talking about, he was actually setting up just a definition, say if you want to talk about a work group, this is this kind of thing. If you don't have that, then other things happen, and then what do you call them? Well, crudely call them unconscious things. And he is the person who introduced this notion, such as the group animal. It said certain patterns come into play, which are all about not being real, not being authentic, and so on. And I want to add into that, if I may stretch our time.
Of course, yes, no, it's fine.
No, but I love from Gordon Lawrence, and it's a very strange language initially, but helpful. He talked about conversation, just as a general term for dealing with what he wanted to look at. And he talked about two kinds of conversation, but he used the term politics. I don't know why do I use the term. So he talked about, it says, one kind of conversation which follows the politics of salvation. What did it mean by salvation? It means the group is always waiting for the master to come, for the solution to appear. Yeah.
From within.
For the answer to be given from outside.
Ah.
And it could be a kind of outside within the group, but it's some various developments of that you can see. But they're hoping to see, they're looking for something they don't have, which has to be imported into the group by some means. That's salvation. It's like, save us, save us. This is a bit of subtle language here. It may be not helpful, but I persist. And then you have the politics of revelation. And he said, that's what comes from the group. So the group accepts its finitude. That's my favorite crummy phrase, there's nobody here but us chickens. This is it, folks. There isn't going to be somebody come riding in on the white steed to rescue us or take us off to the promised land, which is the worldview of a lot of people,
Yes.
And idiots, of course. But then you see, if you got to accept this, one thing is accepting finitude, like this the group won't last forever, and taking it in, making it intentional. Now I can't resist bringing in Dolly Parton as the greatest.
Another bit of Dolly.
The greatest American philosopher, I think. She said, "Find out who you are and do it on purpose." I think this is the most amazing pronouncement I've ever heard from anybody. I think it's absolutely masterful. I mean, you see, this this beautiful life intelligence she has, businesswoman and singing. But the revelation, if you say you really stick to this, it's just us, then we have to make something between us.
Mm-hmm.
And then something can emerge. But as long as we think, it's rather like various organizations, companies and so on, about buying a consultant. They do it. It's all part of the parcel about making sure they never learn anything. They don't have to change their ways.
Yeah. People don't like change.
Yeah. Well, so And that thing about experts, which is interesting enough in various ways, is being questioned in these days. You know, you bring in an expert who's supposed to know, and by appointing them or even you're paying over money for them, your conscience is cleared. You see, we've asked for this help, we paid for it, you know, and this is going to help us. Instead of saying, look, put yourself on the block, question what the hell you're doing, you know, and in fact, like companies get in their shit because they don't even listen to each other at all. It's all bullshit, and so on. So this strikes against, and this is part of my concern at the present time. You know, I'm involved in writing this book about the life and work of Mr. Bennett and how he was so extraordinary and beginning to embrace, as few others have done, embrace the realm of the sciences. Because I'm very appalled at the attitude of a lot of the Gurgeous who just spit on ordinary science. I think they're superior and got this fantasy of Gurgeous knowing some super science, which is the head of quantum theory or whatever it is. It's just bullshit because they put themselves above it. You know, real science requires this incredible intensity of thought and action and cooperation and communication. And you know, imagine they can pluck out of the air, oh, this man has seen the reality. He talks about this higher energy and all rubbish, all of it, you know. That try to bring these worlds of empirical science, which are based on this. We talk about conscious labor. God, science is conscious labor. And the scientists themselves can be idiots and twits and bigots and all the rest of it. They go through an ordeal getting this out. You know, they can't just sit in the corner and mutter inanities and get people around them. No, they really have to be, the exposure and the communication is important. He began to do this, and now we got other people like Russell, I say, who's trained in the world of orthodox mainstream psychology, which is to a large extent still despised by Gurgeous as being inferior. Don't these people know? We were told the truth by this man, Gurgeous. But it doesn't matter who told it, like Gurgeous saying, you know, what would be the point for Jesus Christ being a teacher? You couldn't make use of him, you know. You want Jesus Christ? Do you think you're capable of taking it on? No. You know? So because you subscribe to something, it doesn't mean you're worthy of it. But anyway, blah, blah. So there is this great issue and burning away at me because about that we really want to know. It's in a world where, of course, democracy is under strain because it has an intrinsically hard task. Because coming back to this, you know, having a group and in which, where was it? Yes, I can't remember who I was talking to, one of my friends, you know, about the whole nature of conversation and how I was, in my heart, was yearning up, you know, coming from Mr. Bennett. It was one of us open people, inquiring, changing people, and you know, but still, I think this burden of the system was such because you have eventually to not have a higher and lower, and lots of the traditionalists will say, "Oh my God, anarchy! You know, the inferior will take over. You know, you need the wise people to guide us. You need to be respectful and all that sort of thing." And you see, of course, they have a point in some respects, but you see, this is how to get this. And with Mr. Bennett, and this is the very deep subject, how to get in one of our conversations, perhaps, about Mr. Bennett in groups and so on, because he, you know, is in some of his groups and taking part in being a group leader myself to some degree and all the rest of it. But he was always, man, he was always taking the next step. What's the next step? The advance. He was always progressive kind of chap. And until I must have said, I'm getting bored with your next step, Mr. Bennett. You know, what's the next step this year then? Because I could see it was still going round in that same circle. You have somebody in charge representing the top-down authority. However paternalistic, however compassionate they are, if you're within that realm, you stay within that realm. And so you get this tension everywhere. And it's represented by Beelzebub and so on. You need to start saying, can we do it otherwise? And the people who start saying this are the upstarts, the hooligans, you know, the ignorant peasants, you know, being rude to our elders and betters and all that kind of thing. There's beginning to be changes in the attitude here, but they're very dangerous, they're very unsettling and all the rest of it. But you could never get to another level because the other level of the groups and so on, because he would get the more advanced groups you see and the older people, experienced people in doing it, and it all seems very rational, but it isn't like that at all, because the upside of you don't have that kind of arrangement. And indeed, Gurgeous gave a kind of wonderful inspirational model in his second books, The Meetings of Remarkable Men. I just adore that sometimes. It could be these different characters. One's a kind of drunk, one's a scholar, one's a priest, one's a, you know, and one's a professor, like his love of Squidloff, who's just an academic professor. They go off to the mountains, you know, and they cross the Gobi Desert because they've solved these complex problems by their cooperation of their intelligences. All that's the way for it. But groups are not like that. Mm. Most groups, this is very important, really have no concrete aim.
This is something for groups to think about. Hopefully they're watching this podcast, because I think that, well, as we know through history, when you had the upstarts we was just talking about, it's normally a generation or two before their ideas are finally accepted, and then things change and move on into the next direction.
That's it, yes. So we probably have to anticipate, you know, discord, turbulence and all that sort of thing. But that's been something emerging in the 20th century, you know, about turbulence, chaos, the unpredictability. And Bennett claimed, you see, when I say claimed, I'm not too sure he was being direct about this, or he wrote this fantastic book, The Dramatic Universe, where actually we're going to have a small group discussing that next Sunday in university. He said, oh, people didn't get what it was about reading. What it was about really was about hazard. There's no certainty. There are no absolutes and so on. But I think you go through it, it's overwhelmingly kind of like dominating you with visions of explanation of everything in the universe, you know, and then you think that people just go back and go, wow, look at all this, you know. But he was like a sort of contradiction in many ways. He had this thing in him, an enormous kind of intuitive feel for things. And so he's right, this is it. And what he was after should have been paralleled, you see, with what's happening in the world outside the so-called work. And again, I want to, not again, but plus, put into this, you know, I'm trying to scrabble more minutes from you. The, how to say it, the, having the, how to express this here. Yeah. And as mentioned in the book Transformation, he tried to do it in a way without saying this is the Gurgeous work. You know, it's in general, anybody wants to do this kind of thing, and this is what it's like. And I remember Coon Springs never got off the ground. He wanted us to get together and work on, make an encyclopedia of spiritual methods, you know, which should cover everything. And then we didn't have the people, the money and resources and all the rest of it. And it's like, and his book I put together, The Sevenfold Work, and he was said in a way which is, you know, it's like how people can be, so to speak, in the work and not even know they're in the work, and then call it. And it's like, and it was quite, quotes one of his friends, Cornelius, and he said, when like a ton of bricks on somebody, he started talking about the Gurgeous work. He said, what do you mean the Gurgeous work? It's just the work. It's a pain. He gets attached to somebody. Why? But just, of course, there are people, they've done his best, he's left a trace, but it's, what is this work? And Bennett had that passion for it. He writes about it in this extraordinary way. last version of the book they made from a spiritual psychology. We had this dream about the work and how the work itself was reality. It's extraordinary. It completely blows apart any kind of who cares about the traditions of different groups and beliefs and the rest of it. It's that, and he even gave the example in this sevenfold work series of a hostess in her actions to bring this social event about, or an actor or something. And he said yes, and he eventually called it a wonderful phrase: work is the perfection of doing, isn't it? Not sitting down going, I know, breathing in your left nostril or whatever it is, who cares about it, So that realism, and it's very fragile, but all this razzmatazz about Gurdjieff and the work can completely obscure it, So do we stop then, dear?
I think we should here, because that's been fantastic, Tony. I want you to get on and finish writing that book, because we're all looking forward to reading that.
Oh, God, no. But you've got to understand, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm blundering. I'm completely lost. But this is a reality I'm trying to accept. I'm not going to get the answer. I'm not going to get the system, ever.
But you can still work on yourself.
Yeah.
The individual, yes.
And
transform yourself.
And have fun.
Yes. And Gurdjieff did make that he said that, have fun with this.
I think he would approve of it, yeah.
Don't take life too seriously. I have to stop myself sometimes and go, oh my God, I'm taking life far too seriously.
My life is fine to take oneself seriously. One of the divine gifts is a sense of humor.
But people, I do recommend highly, we were talking about Russell Schreiber's book, fantastic book. I do recommend that. But also, Tony's got the diversity.org, so please go there and sign up or go and read what's there and look more into Tony's work. And I
recommend that book, to get a transformation.
Yes, transformation. Yeah, that is a good book. I've got that one as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
I know.
Yes.
Isn't it kind of nitty gritty in it? It's like, what do we do?
I've not read it for a long time, and you've made me feel I can see it down here. It's like I might have a little. I might take it away with me when I go away next week and look through it all again. Yes, maybe that's the book to take. So thank you very much, Tony.
Oh, thank you. You're like the Socratean midwife. You bring things to birth.
And so this baby has been delivered, and I shall end the podcast here. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Until next time.
Adios, amigos.